Boom, we're here. We are here. So it's a very interesting episode today. Very interesting. But let's do some housekeeping and get it over quick. If you're just listening, hit subscribe, rate, and share the podcast. Comment. We want to hear your positive thoughts. We want to connect with you. That's what we're doing here is we're connecting. If you just listen, you can also watch on Big Moo TV. Hearts Over Everything has a YouTube channel, Big Moo TV. You'll find all of our content. Shout out to Third Eye Collection and all the black and brown apparel companies support black business. And that's pretty much the housekeeping. But today we have a special kind of podcast today because I speak a lot about who I used to be, and I think I speak about it with some shame and there's just some baggage there. But I wanted to bring a friend of mine on who is a certified coach, practitioner, anger management specialist, domestic violence specialist, clinical trauma specialist for individuals and families, and he's getting his master's in counseling, crisis response, and trauma in December. My friend Cory George, how you doing, brother?
I am wonderful, thank you. But despite everything going on, I'm wonderful. Thank you.
I wanted you to kind of break down some stuff. And I do, you mentioned a PSA. You asked me to do a PSA last week. And I was very uncomfortable doing it because of my past. I didn't want to be a poser or now that I'm living this squeaky clean life, I didn't want to mush down my past. I just had a lot of baggage around it. And you could sense that when we talked about it. So I thought it would be valuable for us to bring you on the podcast and to kind of take the opportunity to break some of this stuff down. And we'll get into what this stuff is. But I want to heal out loud. I want to let people know, look, there's black people healing. We're getting better. You make mistakes in the past, you get better. So I'll let you take the floor. But that's what setting the intention. That's what I want to do here.
Well, awesome. Well, first of all, thank you for being brave enough to keep telling your story. And it's always interesting when we tell the pieces, but we never put the whole puzzle together. And once a person walks you through the whole puzzle, you understand that exactly what they're doing now is exactly what their life set them up to be. Because oftentimes, for example, in your position, we think that someone had to go to school for that. They had to learn this. But what if the best learning ground was your life?
Yeah.
What if life and all of its twists and turns was perfectly planned to introduce you to a higher calling?
Yeah.
Because oftentimes I ask people, if you had not gone through A, B, and C, would you be interested in doing D, E, and F? So for us to discount those struggles means we possibly discount our higher calling. And I remember being on your show. And I was captivated by your presence. And then it wasn't just that, it was your calm. And I had said to myself, I said, there's a story there. I said, there's a story. I don't know what the story is. And then it was when I asked you to be a part of my domestic violence towards men, the program that I had in my spirit. So when I visualized the project, I saw you and a few other people, and you were the only one that said no. And I said, damn it, no one says no to me. No. Yeah. But I said, and then you sent a text and I said, I need to unravel this text. Then I called you and then I understood what it was. And I said, well, perhaps these projects you're doing is redemption. That's the cost you pay for healing, is that some people will always hold you to a memory that they want to hold you at. As I told you, but you may have hurt people 20 years ago. If that's the last memory that they have of you, even if there's proof that you've done well, if it serves their comfort to keep you there, that's not your problem.
Yeah.
Your problem is to be the best.
Yeah.
So your problem and your solution are the same thing. It's to be the best and to show through action, because that's what you're doing. You're showing through pure action. It's not through education. It's not through writing. And, you're showing through action. You are modeling exactly what people should see of you. And that's the authenticity. But then I said, there's a story there. And then when you started to give me the pieces, I said, oh, okay.
Yeah.
I said, this is the stuff that these things should be for.
Yeah.
Oftentimes we look at black men and we see just a black man, and he's usually not as proactive in his feelings. He's usually responding to stimuli that he can't control, such as social injustice, such as his past, if it's overwhelming. But then there are some like you who have poise.
Thank you.
And that poise didn't come from waking up one day. That poise came from logical decisions that you had to make. And that was despite what you were dealing with.
Yeah.
So what I felt was important was I wanted to walk through your story because also those who are watching, this is my first time hearing the whole story. So you guys are hearing exactly what I hope to hear. It's just not in a phone call.
Yeah.
It's a video call.
Yeah.
And also before I start, I want to dedicate this show to my beautiful daughter Jade, and to all the courageous people who just don't know how courageous they are yet. And hopefully this walkthrough, mixed with some psycho education, will inspire you to make some new decisions. That's all we ask of you towards your healing process. Really, is just making a new decision for a new outcome. Because sometimes we see this healing process as a weighted process that has to be medical, that has to be heavy. Sometimes it's just doing one thing different and understanding that there's a possibility of a different outcome. So I want to get started. I want to ask you, first of all, where are you from? And if you were to tell me about your upbringing in 3 or 4 lines, what would that be?
So I'm from Queens, New York. I was born and raised in New York City. And in 3 lines: abundant, loving, supportive. I believe that that's how I remember it. My childhood, I don't, it's interesting. Any of the problems that I did have, I didn't make sense to me until I was an adult. But if you ask me when I first got sober, I thought my upbringing was great. It was
Mhm.
supportive and abundant. We had every big Christmases, and it was carrying a lot of love. My mom loved us so much.
But in abundance can also be something else as well. So you mentioned that if I asked you back then, you thought that your childhood was wonderful. Would there be a different answer now?
Yeah, I'm just more. There's been a maturation of my just how I viewed, because I understand the family structures, and I understand that we damage our children whether we want to or not. And my mom was codependent, and I was hyperactive, and there was signs of mental illness early in my life. And my dad worked too much and was kind of absent providing, and that's what in the 90s, that's what it was. People did, right? It was like, you don't have to really be around, just work and just pay the bills. And he did that, and that was what his father did, and he did that well. He provided for us, and we had everything that we needed. But there was an absence there that I felt, that I looked back at, that I missed my dad and my mom, over, not even overbearing, but caring for me, and then me having, clear signs of emotional and mental struggles and down regulation. I just had a hard time managing, even as young as I can remember.
So I heard a few things. So I heard that your father modeled this behavior that perhaps you thought men do. They provide, they work hard, and the intention was well.
Yeah.
So I want to make sure that we understand that although right now we see in society that it may not have been the best way, but the intention was well suited. Meaning my job is to go out and provide at all costs. Even if they meant I'm absent, my son or daughter knows that they have school clothes, that they're fed, they have a roof, and so for you, that was the model of manhood you saw.
Yeah.
You said that your mother was loving and overbearing.
Not overbearing. That's not the word I would use.
Let's use a different word. What would a better word be? Overcompensating?
She was concerned. She has always been concerned, and now the same way my son is kind of hyperactive, has a hard time down regulating. And if I was my mom, I'd be concerned too. Like I was concerned for my son 6 months ago before he started to kind of grow out of his really intense his intensity. He's still very intense, but he's calming down a little bit. So for my mom, she was concerned, and she showed me a lot of love, more attention than she showed my siblings. I realized I took a lot of attention from my siblings because I needed something. I was
Yeah.
struggling.
And so when you say struggling, how did that affect you socially, in school, with your siblings? And I say this because both of my kids have ADHD
Mm-hmm.
on different realms. The way that they interact changes throughout the years
Yeah.
because they're growing, they're going through their changes in their body as teenagers, but their interaction is different, each time.
Yeah.
Because one year one may feel like I'm giving more attention, but that because your needs are heavier, and then the next year it changes. So how did, when you're looking back at it now, how did that affect you socially and also with your family?
So I've always had a hard time socially, and I still do. But being my parents put us in a school in a predominantly white neighborhood. So my brother and sister grew up in going to the same school, but maybe they didn't feel it as much. But I felt it. I felt different. I felt different being ethnically. Obviously, everybody's white and Asian except me. I'm like, oh
Mm-hmm.
shit. And if there was other black kids, it was very few of us. So there was already that, and then I had a hard time with friendships because I was impulsive, and then a hard time with my siblings because, again, I sucked a lot of energy. And as I've gotten older and my mental illness began to creep more and to exacerbate,
Mm-hmm.
my relationships with my siblings became more and more estranged as my mind deteriorated as I got older. Because it by 10, 11, 12, 13 and up, it just got worse and worse and worse. So I don't really remember a lot of my childhood because of other trauma that I blocked out. But I know that socially I struggled and I was uncomfortable. And I know that I pushed my siblings further and further away, from a young age. And now we're just trying to rebuild relationships now.
And did you feel different? So did you feel alienated from people? So like, were you feeling like the island within a continent?
Well, and yes, I still feel like that. But now I know why. There was this guy in this summer camp around when I was between 6 to 10 years old
Mm-hmm.
who would sit me on his lap and whisper things in my ear, and there's things that I don't remember, and tell me all kinds of crazy sexual things as a little kid. And later, as I got older, he would send me porn and talk to me about masturbation. This guy was older than my brother. My brother's 5 years older than me. So he just introduced this concept. He told me, he was like, "You're gay. You don't know this yet." As a little tiny kid, he was like, "You're gay. You don't know it yet, but you like boys." And told me that. And I've always been attracted to women as long as I can remember. So that already, now in retrospect, I was like, oh, that's why I already felt different. Because I had someone was telling me a story in my mind. And then that goes on top of having hard time down regulating and feeling, out of place in my family. And then that goes being ethnically different than my peers. And that exacerbated as I got older.
So was that the trauma that you were speaking of specifically, or is it something else?
That's the trauma that this year I've been unearthing and kind of making amends with, making peace with.
And I can totally understand that because your mind is pliable at that age. So whatever you're learning or whatever someone is telling you at that age, and 5 years older, well, but you said he was older than your brother.
Yeah.
So, and
he might have been
about
16. He might have been 16 or 20, or I don't know. I can't remember.
So I tell people that when I was dealing with my experiences as a child being raped by different relatives, they were all older. So to me, they were bigger. At 6 years old, everybody's bigger than you.
Yeah.
Now looking back, they were not that much older, but from a 6-year-old point of view, I was overpowered. And those experiences changed my perception of myself, changed my perception of who I thought I was in the world. Unfortunately, that was a form of abuse for you too. And I can understand totally how that can massage your mind into believing something that they wanted you to believe on top of every other thing that you're trying to cope with. And it further alienated you from yourself first.
Yeah.
Because it created a false story. That's why it's very careful when we're talking with people to not lead the story. Because even at an older age, if you're a client of mine and I tell you certain things so often, it can create a new story. So unfortunately, you were raising yourself with the false story that added to your whole breakdown.
Yeah, and in retrospect now, and I've always been I've had effeminate tendencies always, and I still do. I still have like a little sass in the way that I talk, And I'm at this point, I'm 30. It's fine. Like I'm completely fine with it, secure with that. But kids made fun of me for this my entire life as well. So I realized now, after doing a lot of work in essay and different sex 12 step, like I was proving something to myself with my promiscuity. Like I was like, no, I am not. Like there was like this
Absolutely.
hyper masculinity because this guy stole any masculinity that I was gonna have. So I had to like over compensate for it as a young person, and that lasted well into my 20s.
And also because you were already questioning yourself. So now when others question, it almost makes you believe that the questions you have for yourself are true.
Yeah.
Like
exactly. It
yeah,
was
so,
really an existential crisis
yeah.
even when I first got sober, this first popped up for me when I was 24. And I told my therapist this, and my therapist was like, Eric, do not do anything stupid, because a lot of guys get sober and they'll experiment sexually with other with men. And he was like, I was not thinking about doing that, but he was like, Eric, what this guy said to you is not true. He's like, I fucking know you. He's like, I know you. Do not do any of that. Like it haunted me. I questioned it. This story that was told until I was in my early 20s. It really fucked with me in my early 20s.
And it's almost, and I never use this word, but it's almost like a negative affirmation, meaning um, the person who told you this was, they were making a story. And I can almost guarantee if I can pull back his lens, someone told him the same thing, because you're not 16. That it's hard for me to imagine a 16-year-old knowing well enough to feed a child a story like that. It's hard for me. So that's why when I told you the most important parts of the work I do is the backstory. Yes. So for example, I was abused, but I'm also interested to find out about the abuser's history. Then come to find out it was happening in my family throughout the generations, but no one said anything. So the importance of the backstory is not to get anyone off the hook, but to trace a trajectory to where it all started and how we can unearth that mess.
Yeah.
So, which is not your responsibility, because I feel that's his story. But going back to what he told you, you had doubts, and then the teasing made it almost made it an affirmation that if you're questioning yourself and someone has the same question, well, it must be true.
Yeah.
And especially if you have a belief that being gay is wrong, or being gay goes against what you feel,
and in the zeitgeist then, then it was wrong. Yeah.
Yeah. And so I want to tell you, if no one has ever told you, your responses were normal of a traumatic experience. Most often people upset themselves by thinking, why didn't I respond in a different way? But the truth is, when you deal with a traumatic experience, there are certain types of symptoms and things that happen that helps you to normalize the fact that, yes, I was in an experience that was abnormal. I had normal reactions to an abnormal life event.
Yeah.
So it's to help those who are listening who are worried about how they're dealing with their trauma. If it's still a trauma that's unhealed and you're worried about why you have an addiction, if you're worried about why you get upset so easily, or why you're absent in your feelings, those are responses to a traumatic event. Now it's time to work through those so that way you can have a new set of responses in your toolkit.
Yeah.
That's what healing does. Healing offers you a different way of seeing who you are, separate from those events.
Yeah.
That way you don't normalize it. Well, let's say you unnormalize your own behavior. So if you have a short temper, so for example, most times when I'm dealing with people who have anger management issues, sometimes I can trace it back to a life event that they didn't realize was a sponsor of that. So if you have neglect issues, and if you fear that someone's going to leave you, what if that's a catalyst for you being violent towards somebody because you're afraid of being left, or you're angry because that person reminds you of your father? That person reminds you of someone that left you, and you don't want to lose them.
Yeah.
And you think that if you harm them, they'll stay, or if you threaten that, it'll stay. So that's why these backstories are so important, because that's where the healing is.
Yeah.
So I want to move forward just a little bit, because we got into the space of being, well, you said in your 20s with the sexual part, but I want to go back to your teenage years,
Yeah.
because there's something in the middle there
Yeah.
that's the start to all of this. So if I were to ask you, where do you feel that your outward actions began to decline?
So I do not blame my brother for this, because he was just doing what a guy does. When I turned 13, he turned 18, and his birthday's in August, so he was really 17, and he went up to college. He went
Okay.
up to college, and my brother, if you listen to my podcast, anybody who listens, no, this is my hero. This is my absolute hero. He's the person who I model the best parts of a man that I want to have. He is still that man today. I'm very, very proud of him. But he went away to college, and I already felt different. And I intentionally, as a kid, he was my rival. I wanted to do the opposite of him. I want to do the opposite. And so he went away to college and was like, he's the all-American guy. And he is. He's like, mixed, martial artist, gold medalist, great student, worked hard, modest, stoic. And I was just emotionally, volatile and all that. So when he went away to college, I wanted to do the opposite of what he was doing. I wanted to make my own lane. So when he went away to school, I found a group of friends. I found men or guys. I found guys or boys who I always say when I tell my story, we started doing drugs, and drugs even the playing field for me. Drugs even the playing field for me. Everybody was fucking their life up now. So even though they were like, we were all little misfits. I always hung out with them. We were skateboarding around town, and we were, drinking and in the park and smoking blunts, and I fell in with these kids, and a lot of trauma came with hanging out with these kids, and I inflicted tons of trauma on them. But that was the catalyst, was my brother leaving for school, and me falling into the misfit groups of kids.
Well, what's interesting is you say misfits, but at the time they felt like people who could relate to you, because you felt like a misfit before you joined, right?
Exactly.
And
My friends are still like that today. My friends are still like a ragtag group of people, like loners
yeah,
who.
and so that's why it is so important for us to evaluate how we view ourselves against the world. Um, so oppositely for me, when I was going through, I didn't feel like I compared to men, because I was abused by men. I felt raggedy. I didn't feel clean. Um, I didn't participate in group sports with men. I didn't trust them. I was frightened of them. Um, I leaned towards more the female side of my family, which would explain some of my characteristics, because that's all I was safe with.
Mm-hmm.
And it also impaired my relationships with my dad, who wasn't really there anyway. So it just made it worse, because I feel like I was unprotected. So I feel protected by women. So it was very easy for me to glean towards my grandmother, my aunts, uncles, and cousins, not so much. Um, but me feeling like a misfit made me feel like I did not belong to be with any group of people. And it was hurtful, because I was lonesome, but everyone thought I was a loner. But I want to go back to you, because what I feel happened was you normalized how you felt about yourself, meaning this is how I am, and these people have something wrong. And I know you can understand this when I say this, because I was raised by someone who I love dearly, who became a crack addict. All of a sudden, all of her friends were crack addicts, meaning her friends went from friends that she worked with or friends from church to we all doing the same thing. So who gonna check me?
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
And they did check me, because they are normies, as I would say. The group of kids I hung out with, they are doctors and attorneys now, and like money managers and things like that. They didn't go down the darkness. They didn't have the 10% gene. They didn't have the obsession of the mind and the allergy of when they put liquor in their body. They were able to stop. I wasn't able to stop. So I even outgrew them, or they outgrew me. And progressively through my teens, I explored my drug use, and fell into the deeper and darker, seedy parts of drug use in my teens. But yeah, but they were the introduction to me of like, oh, I can feel, at least for a minute, at least while I'm drunk, at least while I'm high, I can feel okay for a minute, you know.
Well, let's be real, because there's for some children, teens I have too, there is a rebellion period where they're testing the boundaries, where they're trying to fit in. Some of us, we get over that because we just go a different route. There are some that stay there because they've normalized it. It feels good in this moment, not thinking of the consequences, not thinking of 2 years from now. We're thinking, what are we doing next weekend? So where are we hanging out, and what are you drinking? Is it Mad Dog? Is it vodka? What? But because you said you kept going, when you kept going, looking back now, what do you feel that you were satisfying, or that you were quenching, or you were nurturing at that time?
Discontentment, just discontentment and looking back now, from what that guy, the conditioning that man and put me through, and that trauma that he put me through, the racial trauma. Those friends that I hung out with were white people, and every joke was about me being black. Every joke was the N-word. Every I was the butt of every joke. So there was this immense loneliness and discontentment, hating being black, hating who I was. Just there was a multifaceted component.
Yeah.
There was multiple components, but it was a general discontentment and extreme loneliness. And I felt that I still sometimes feel that extreme loneliness, except when I'm with my family that I've created, my partner and my children. They have taken that, and that's the beauty of that. You create the home that you wanted, and I have that with my family. But there was an immense loneliness that, and I talked about on the podcast that dropped earlier this week. When we would smoke blunts and like go for a ride, I was connected. When we would all get coke together and do coke, and even if it was gross and fucking raunchy, we would be doing coke and I was together. And on ecstasy, we would party all night together, and subsequently shooting heroin with people. We would go on little treks and we would get our heroin and we'd shoot up, and even though we were incoherent, we were together. So much of my drug use was just trying to feel connected with people, and to ease that discomfort that I had so deep down in me, and it's still there. That discomfort is. I still have a hard time. I'm still a wallflower. I still can't dance. I still feel like an alien. I still feel like people are looking at me and judging me. I still feel that. I don't know if that'll ever go away.
Well, yeah. And so here's the thing: a lot of what we feel won't be. So I have this theory in my book, and this is what I've always said. Sometimes we're looking so hard to solve things, and sometimes the solving is not to erase it, but to manage it. So what you're doing now is you're managing those reactions. And part of it is, maybe I don't put myself in the position to have to manage those reactions. So if you feel like you're a wallflower, you're not going to put yourself in a position to be a wallflower often. You will take risks to hang out and to be social. But once you feel that pumpkin, once you feel the carriage turning back into a pumpkin, it's time to go.
Yeah.
I'm the exact same way. I tell people I have a clock. That's why I drive myself to places. So when I'm done, because my friends like to party, I'm about to expire. I love you so much, but I'll see you later, because if the pumpkin happens, it's not going to be nice.
Yeah.
So when you know yourself and you're self-aware, that's a power. When you know what places, things, and people don't serve you well, and the ones that serve you well. But I want to also add, you said discontentment. So I do feel that the drug use and alcohol was to numb that.
Yeah.
Was to numb those feelings. And numbing is a direct reason why some people fall into addiction, because we don't want to feel.
Yeah. And
sometimes it can be a temporary thing. So let's say you're dealing with grief, or you're dealing with a tragedy. Sometimes the numbing for that moment is okay.
Yeah.
For example, if you're dealing with grief or some type of tragedy in a heavy way, they will sedate you because they want you to be in a temporary space of peace.
Yeah.
So in those cases, that's understandable. But when that carries over and is extended to where the numbing turns into a physical need of the drug, that's where we have to understand that it's no longer, well, actually, it's never about judgment. We have to understand the crisis of what it is. It's an addiction.
Yeah.
So your reasons for doing what you did, it's typical. Many people don't ask, Why did you become an addict? Because it's an unfair question. Your goal was not to be a drug addict, right?
Yeah. Well, I always
Goal
tell
was
that was
never to be an alcoholic.
yeah.
Your goal was to numb. Your goal was to feel like you were part of a group. So whatever that group was doing, and you felt like you can be a part of that, because I dealt with this mental illness. I didn't feel like I didn't feel like a thriving member of any group. I dealt with my sexuality. I questioned me so much that whomever was willing to accept me,
Exactly.
I was willing to do that at all costs.
And that led to my sex addiction as well. That was not led to my sex addiction, but it fed my sex addiction. That those questions about my sexuality, it would prove to myself, like, the more women I would have sex with, prove to myself, and then that that brought ease and comfort as well, and that brought make me feel like I'm accepted. I'm accepted by this woman, at least, even if we're just making out, she accepts me for this 5 minutes. You know what I mean? Even if it's not a relationship,
Right.
I'm being accepted. I sought that for so long. I've only recently ceased seeking that true need for acceptance.
Well, and you said something very interesting and very powerful, is that what I was going to piggyback on is you felt accepted for whatever time span that was, whether it was until you ejaculated, wiped up, and left, or maybe the next morning. But when it went down, you were still returning back to the thoughts of yourself, back to the negative cognition of who you were. And once that need arose and you couldn't handle that stress, your coping skill was sex.
Yeah.
That was a coping skill, or the weed, or the alcohol, or the heroin.
Yeah.
So this is about coping skills. This is about not having the tool set. The average person doesn't have a tool set. So before you seeked your help, you did whatever you could, and that was survival.
Yeah.
So many people fault themselves for going into survival mode, but that's how we're built. So before we are taught how to survive, we're in survival mode. So whatever we got to do, fight or flight. And I say these things to let people take themselves off the hook, because so many people are struggling with the past of what they did. But if you were going through trauma, there are typical types of responses that are normal. If you're going through addiction, there are typical types of responses and coping skills that are normal. So when we don't let ourselves off the hook, that is the hardest time for us, because it's hard for us to seek the healing.
Yeah.
Because we're killing ourselves on the inside, saying what I did was bad.
Yeah.
No, what you did was survival. Others see it as bad. You see people talking about a drug addict like, I don't know why she's on the corner doing this. But inside that drug addict is a human soul.
Yeah.
That was taken over by a disease. So once we start to make sure that people understand, with any type of disease, there are these ramifications that the person can't help. If you have cancer, you can't help that it's spreading,
Yeah.
right? You can't help that. So to say, oh my God, you got cancer, how could you? That's what you're saying.
Yeah.
Oh my God, you have HIV, how could you? That's what it sounds like.
Yeah.
Oh, you're an addict, how could you do that? Because I don't think anybody goes into the drug use or the alcohol intending for it to be an integral part of their life.
Yeah.
Is that fair to say?
Yeah, yes, that is fair. And I never, when I started drinking and using, it wasn't the intention of being a drug addict, but there was something romantic about the idea that I was gonna die doing die with some ease and comfort. The more I started to romanticize. I had a lot of suicide attempts as a kid, more than I can count, and I kind of conceded that, like, I'm gonna die an alcoholic death or a drug addict death, and so I leaned into it. I leaned into being. I was almost proud of being a drug addict.
Mm-hmm.
It was. I needed it. This guy took my masculinity. I had no racial identity, but my identity was being a fucking junkie, and I was okay with that. And then to go into like where the PSA was coming in, a lot of, because I had this masculine, no idea of what masculinity was. Being able to be a tough guy, being able to beat people up, being violent against to anybody and anyone, provided a sense of acceptance. People were like, "Oh, Eric is gonna fuck up whoever," or Eric could handle it. It provided me like purpose, and it provided me a sense of power. Lack of power was my problem. I had no in my whole life. I've never had any fucking power. Never. My brother was better than me. Fucking these white kids were better than me. But violence gave me power, and I you know wielded it like a sword, and I just did whatever I wanted and I hurt people. I found an identity in that.
And when you say power, what I heard, especially knowing the story of the gentleman that fed you this falsehood about yourself, um, how much of that power was really rooted in you're not going to let anyone else mess with you again?
I absolutely, and like people, if anybody said anything to me that I was trying, like a guy, people would try to make like casual jokes, like people, and even if they were not fun, they were off color and not funny, they'd get punched in the face so quickly. I would punch
And
anybody. I would punch anybody in the face for no one was gonna question me or say anything to me or not do what I wanted to. I'll punch you. I'll beat the shit out of you. Like
yeah,
that was just my resting.
but I wonder if the link, and you can tell me this because I don't want to put words in your mouth, but what I hear is the link between unresolved pain, unresolved feelings towards being hurt and being ashamed to the reminders of that unresolved stuff. So if
Definitely.
someone says something and it was a trigger, it's about managing triggers because most times anger management is this is a trigger. Let me work on the trigger because no one is responsible for managing a trigger. But what I do hear is that because that was unresolved, anything that sounded remotely like that, it triggered the feelings then that you cannot defend yourself. But now I can.
Now I can.
Let me show you what I can do now because I'm not going to let you make me feel that way.
Yeah.
But in essence, you already felt that way because once your anger was in place in the way that it was, and let me be clear, anger is not the problem. Anger is a naturally occurring human emotion. Oftentimes we run from an emotion, but not realize it's not the emotion, it's the response to our emotions. There are times when I'm angry and I bite my lip and I go downstairs in my basement
Yeah.
because I know if I go a certain way, the outcome is not what I choose.
Yeah.
Or when I'm angry, how does that anger motivate me? Maybe the anger motivates me to be assertive instead of aggressive.
Yeah.
But until I knew that, until I could solve why I get so angry and my response is a negative one, I can never get there.
Yeah.
So it sounds like for you at some point you understood it's not about the anger. That's a naturally occurring emotion because you still get angry, right?
Yeah. That's so
No,
good. Yeah.
there's things that piss you off, but now it's like, oh, but what is my response to that? What is that telling me? It's because sometimes our anger is telling us things that we have to heal.
Yeah.
The anger or sadness is saying, should that hurt me as much as it does? Yes, it may hurt the average person, but should that be the response?
Yeah.
And that's why if anyone's listening, when you have what you feel is an illogical or irrational emotional response to something, listen to that. That's your body telling you it's time to walk through that pain because if you don't, you'll have a more negative outcome as it goes on.
Yeah.
And then we tend to blame other people when it's not them because humans will, I love my spouse, I love my kids, but damn if someone doesn't upset me.
Yeah.
But I don't hit them.
Yeah.
There were times where I may have been verbally abusive because abuse looks different for everybody.
Yeah.
I know you told me that it was a physical nature, but abuse can be verbal. It can be financial, where you want to have control over everything. It could be sexual. It could be so many ways, but abuse is abuse.
Yeah.
And the question becomes, why do I have to be that way?
Yeah.
So I want to ask you, in terms of your anger and your violence and all of this stuff, in those moments during those years, did you see a future for yourself? And I ask this only because sometimes when people are in that state of mind, their future is bleak. Someone told me, well, I don't see myself living past the next 5 years. So in their mind, why don't I just have fun or why don't I just F it up? It was
85% of me was like, I'm gonna die because I wanted to die. When I tell you I would not stop committing suicide. Even my use was, I tried to commit suicide in 2015 actually. So sober, I tried as well. And if you asked me 4 years ago when I was at outpatient at Sharp Mesa Vista, and I did their cognitive behavioral therapy program, which changed my life, I would tell my therapist, I'm going to kill myself one day. It's going to get me one day. Like, I'm going to live a short life. Even 3 years ago, I thought that. But there was 85% of me, even until 3 years ago, 85% of me thought was not going to live a very long life. But then there was always this smaller percentage of me that knew that I had promise in my life, that knew that I had so much potential, knew that I was smart, knew that I was outgoing. That's what propels me today. Now there's that 75% of this belief in myself. That's why I do this podcast. It's like you need a belief in yourself to do a podcast and to do the things that I do and to be a coach and you need to really believe in yourself. But there was a small percentage of me that was like, I'm gonna get out. I knew I was gonna get sober. So when I finally was presented with the opportunity to get sober, it was like I just walked in it. When I was 23 and I went to rehab, I was like, okay, boop, 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 I'm sober now. This is that little percentage. It happened. There was that hope that my life would be better. But if you ask me generally, I was hoping I would die. I was a hope to die drug addict.
Well, there was pain, there was sorrow. There was sorrow for the person you thought that you would become. There was I feel there was a sorrow for who you didn't know you were.
Yeah.
But it's the 15% that let you stay alive. It was the 15% that said, not yet, not yet. That the 85% was driving the habits. It was driving, the addiction. The 15% was, wait a minute, let me not go too far.
Yeah.
Let me stay on the cusp. And people assume that when a person can rationally say, I am going to die, that's not a problem. It is. We look at suicide thinking there has to be this overt crisis, this overt thing of, oh, I'm going to do it now. But if someone is casually saying, I'm going to do it often, and you hear that, take the clue. Yeah. There is a crisis. It's just been brewing slowly.
Yeah.
So thankfully, the universe has you here with us because
I was meant to be. I really feel like that. I really feel, it really propels me. I really feel like I'm meant to be here because being alive is. I tried I tried to die. I really put full-time, 24 hours a day, 7 days a week effort into not living. And thankfully for my parents that I do have that privilege of having parents who never gave up, parents who invested in my mental health and still check up on me like, hey, you going to the doctor? Hey, you seeing your therapist? Parents who still make sure I'm, keep me accountable to my recovery, even almost 7 years later. They're like, you going to meetings? You sponsor men?
Yeah.
They still are. And I had parents like you, who care about your children who never give up. So I'm very lucky because because I faced, I was almost looking at prison for 7 years for a case, and my parents really bailed me out of that. They really, really bailed me out of that. And I'd be getting out of prison now if they didn't save my life.
So let's shift to, I want to shift now because you mentioned it, that support system. Many people feel that I need to do this alone. I need to heal alone. I need to walk through this alone. I know when I'm dealing with crisis and trauma, I tell people sometimes you're not prepared to walk through that muck, because if it's unearthing memories and things that you've already stuffed with alcohol or drugs or any other action, you may not be safely prepared to journey that alone. So I want to ask you, what do you feel was the value of having people who supported you? And I hate to say even when you're down, because that's what support is.
Yeah.
Support beams. Like if you put, certain things on support beams, it's supposed to be there when things may get weak. That's the intention of it.
Yeah.
So when we say, even when I was down, no, that's when they're activated.
Yeah.
How valuable for you, looking back and even looking now, as you said, was having people who believed in what you didn't see for yourself? So
my mother's love is what taught me about spirituality. That's what taught me about a spiritual life, because and I see it with my children and my partner. I love my kids, but the love of a mother is something that is divine. So my mom I still remember, I can hear my mom saying it today, like she would whisper it to me when I was so intoxicated, I was insane, and I would be passed out on the floor. She would say, never give up. she would say, never give up. And she still tells me that. And I'll remember that on my deathbed. My mom said, never give up, you know? So I'm very lucky to have a mother who was like that. My siblings had to write me off for their protection, and my father did as well, but my mother never gave up. And then getting sober, you know, and going through my mental health struggles that I still have challenges with. I have men that there's been days as a sober man where I've called men 20, 30, 40 times until I felt better. I'm a firm believer. Pick up the phone, call somebody, see a therapist, have, you know, that is, support systems are what it's all about. You know, in my business, I say, we're not meant to do life. We're meant to do life in fellowship. We're meant to do life together, and there's something divine about intimate, you know, male relationships and intimate female relationships as well. But men who support men in not in a toxic way, but in a vulnerable way, has changed my life. And I have two guys, you know, more than two, but I in San Diego, I have two men who I can call about the darkest of my secrets, some of the things that I'm sharing on here that I don't share publicly. They've been knew about me. They've been, you know, so the value of a support system, I think everyone in their healing process needs to do it in with people. We're supposed to heal together.
Here's why I feel that Black men in fellowship is very important. So we have historical trauma. We have the generational trauma because we know the history of our existence, at least in this country. So when we see an advice show that has a white male or female, we see it, we hear it, it may mean something, but we can't attach because we have some trust issues that are very valid that no one is responsibly working with because we're told that we should get over it, right? Wrong. We should have those conversations. We should have those apologies. But until then, we feel most comfortable with who we feel looks and feels and can also understand our experiences. So sometimes going through trauma is not just about you, Eric, going through trauma as Eric. It's you going through it as a Black man. It's you inheriting all of the generational trauma, how your white friends teased you. It's just a reenactment of what you've already inherited because there's proof showing that we can inherit the trauma from our past ancestors. It changes our DNA, you know, at some point. So that's why sometimes we are hypervigilant. That's why sometimes we have heightened anxiety, is because we don't realize that we've inherited stuff that as soon as it's activated, we look like the angry Black man. No, we're not angry, we're cautious. Yeah. So when you're in fellowship with other men, they're modeling that behavior that makes you feel safe. Yeah. Because they get you. They understand you. Even if it's with a woman, I can understand in your marriage where you feel close, but there's nothing like the unity between two Black men. Yeah. Because there's certain things you may not know how to express to your wife until that other Black man tells you, hey, bro, when you go back to her, listen this way or say it this way. Yeah. So you see what I'm saying? It's like there was a reason why it feels comfortable for you and for all of us, you know, to have that connection that sometimes we can't explain, but it is quite explainable. And it's very valuable because there's research showing that people who have great social connections, they have a decreased occurrence of mental illnesses such as depression and anxiety because they have a support system that they can lean on right away. Yeah. It's when you're isolated and you're lonely where those thoughts fester and recycle, then it becomes a hazard because no one is helping you bail yourself out.
Yeah, that's what I hope with my podcast is the larger dream is that even having me and Jay Harris and then you and I and Michael Flicks and I want to normalize these conversations because since I moved to San Diego have I been able to have intimate conversations with other Black men. I think what we're doing right now is so unlike us, but there's a culture, especially in San Diego. I'm so lucky to live here. There's a culture of healing in the Black community here, and maybe it's in other communities too. I see actually on social media during the civil rights movement that we're in, there's a resurgence of kind of Black love that's happening. But I want to normalize Black vulnerability. I want to normalize, you know, the Black healing, and even though the connections I made my friends are all misfits like me, people who are rejected, because I've been rejected by the black community, the white community, everybody. So my friends are the same people. There are Mexican guys who were rejected by the Mexican community and the white community, Jewish guy who was, rejected by his Middle Eastern community. So it's, I've still found those misfits again. It's interesting. The same with the misfits have found each other, but we're misfits in healing together now. But the overlaying, mission and kind of what the real value of the podcast is showing that black people heal, and we're healing out loud, and we're getting better, and we can get better, and it's cool to get better. It's cool to be healthy and black. It's cool, it's tight.
Well, can we talk about vulnerability? Because that's a word that is very, very ashy. And I say because it needs a little bit moisture, and like you see the color, but it's still, it's murky. Our vulnerability has been beaten out of us.
Yeah.
We have to be honest and say it was beaten out of us. I don't know the mentality of how we were in our homeland. I can't talk about that. But I can talk about the moment we got on those boats, it was hell. And for those who survived, it was more hell.
Yeah.
Think about this. When you're on an auction block and you're a slave and you just became a slave, you were free at home. Now you're property. That's trauma.
Yeah.
You don't know what being someone else's property is. Then you have a child. And so now someone sold your husband and he's walking off. You don't know if you're going to see him again. Someone took 2 or 3 of your children out of your arm. Every piece of that family has been traumatized. You was a woman. You're by yourself. Look at the trauma that started as soon as we got on the boats.
Yeah.
That didn't stop anytime soon. Then even when laws were passed, people found different ways of traumatizing us.
Yeah.
Let's be clear. The trauma only changed. It didn't stop. There were legal ways to do it. And then once new laws were created, let's find a different way to do it.
Yeah.
And then without apologies, but then we make the reparations to other nations. Then we bail out other nations.
Yeah.
I'm like, why do they not understand that we're angry?
Yeah.
That our vulnerability has been beaten out of us? Why would I have to convince us to be vulnerable? And understandably, this is not going to be an easy walk. But I liken vulnerability to anything that grows. When you plant a seed, in order for that seed to grow, it has to break the shell. If a seed had feelings, it would be split open down the back. That would hurt.
Yeah.
But we know at some point it's necessary for that tree that we eat from, or from that tree that grows flowers that we put in our vases and it makes life so beautiful. Beauty is not without pain.
Yeah.
Beauty is not without pain. So we have to ask ourselves, what's the bigger investment? A little bit of vulnerability or a lifetime of beauty?
Yeah.
There's a Bible verse that talks about if you give God your ashes, he'll give you beauty.
Yeah.
That's the scary part of, if I give you my pain, what will you give me? More pain or beauty? That's the scary decision that we make. So having examples, there will never be enough examples of turning ashes into beauty. That's why these podcasts like yours are important. I don't think that we could ever have enough of them.
Yeah.
One person doing it is not enough. We should, there should be a coalition. There should be a network of Black male podcasts, strictly Black male positively intended podcasts. Yeah. And I say that because as a speaker myself, I know I don't reach every audience. I know I don't reach every household. I know that the way I talk may jive with someone else, but may not jive with someone else. I may be, and this is crazy, but I may not be dark enough. Some people may have a complex, whereas I'm dark skinned. I've been battered my whole life. I've been made to feel a certain way. But this dark skinned person I see who's making it and who's telling his truth, I feel him. I can connect. He's a picture of where I want to be. So, and because we come in so many colors, sizes, shades, small lips, big lips, thick nose, small nose, muscular, skinny, we need all of us.
Yeah, I agree.
We need everyone. I'm only 5'7", so listen, I'm for the short crew. I'm the short bald crew now, but we need every variety because every variety talks to every other variety of us. So that's why I always enjoy coming on podcasts like this, because my message can never be shared enough. But the gift that I give is being able to allow your story.
Yeah.
to be the catalyst to change. But I want to go back to you because I'm more interested in you. Um, what was the turning point? What I know you said you just washed into
Yeah.
rehab, but there was something that
Yeah.
said,
Yeah.
I need to make a new decision. So when we started the show, it was about making a new decision. What was that catalyst for
I
you?
was morally and spiritually bankrupt. I vacant behind the eyes. My friends, I burnt every bridge. Because of the mental illness, my bipolar disorder peaked its way and then forced its way into every situation I was in. It was just erratic and insane, pure
Mm,
insanity, exacerbated by drug use. So after a decade of the end of a decade of this, the maturation of bipolar disorder and the maturation of an addiction, I didn't have any more friends left. My best friend died in 2009. So I still used for two or three more years after that. After
mm,
he died, more friends were dying. I was getting arrested, and every time I would leave the house, I was abusive to everybody around me, my mom, and yelling and doing what drug addicts do. I'm doing a few interventions. I'm partnering on a few interventions next week, and the addicts and alcoholics do the same thing. We just suck up resources and abuse people until get those resources again. So that's what was the change, was that I was morally, spiritually bankrupt. I had no friends, had no money. I wasn't high. I was only high one day a week. I was sick the rest of the time.
mm.
I just had nothing. When I moved to California, I always say this: I had a duffel bag and a book bag filled with needle caps and Xanax falling out of every pocket. That was the extent of my life. That was my life. And when I was presented with the opportunity to go to rehab, I was like, "Fuck it, I'll go." I had nothing. There was the only thing left to do was be homeless on the street and sleep. I would eventually lose all those items that I had, and just if the next step was to be living in a sleeping bag.
Well, and the most important thing about rehab and going and to make it successful, that it has to mean something to you. Going for someone else only means something if you don't want to lose that person. If you don't want it, going to shut folks up, it's not going to work. Going to quiet people, no. If you're afraid of losing something, if you're afraid of losing your life, um, and I had to understand and forgive my aunt who became an addict. I realized what I imagined to be her rock bottom was not her rock bottom. The first thing, and her addiction was stronger than her love for me.
Yeah,
I felt unwanted because she was my rock. If you ask me who my mother was, it was her. So I felt you don't love me enough to put it down, but it was before I understood that it was a disease.
yeah,
Um, and I think that's why some people, especially people who are close to you, may have a hard time dealing with addiction because it changes the relationship that they know.
yeah,
And until we make psychoeducation about drug addiction more mainstream, some people are going to suffer in those relationships because they equate the drug abuse to the loss of a relationship.
yeah,
That's not what you're thinking, because in your head, when you're high, you still love people.
yeah,
When you were not high, you still love your mom. When you're high, you still love her.
yeah,
But it changed the dynamic. So for them, it looks like a loss.
yeah,
So how hard was it when you walked through that door? Although you moseyed on there like Mighty Mouse,
yeah.
uh, how hard was it? Well, there's two questions. How hard was it to go through the process? And there's a maintenance, whereas, as you said, you're always going to be an addict. You're always
Yeah.
going to be, this. Describe the maintenance, because people think that once
Yeah.
you're okay,
Yeah.
you're always okay.
And there's some people my ex-girlfriend who I started using opiates with, she quit and she still quit. And I have close friends who did heroin with me and quit and still and stayed done. But that is not my case. I the maintenance is I'm a 12-step guy. I talk about that on my podcast all the time. I'm an active member of that and here's why I'm so active. And a lot of people don't know this, and I don't. But when I commit suicide in 2015, I had this experience where I was on a lot of medication because when I had 9 months sober, my mental illness peeked its head and said, "Oh, you're
Mhm.
still fucking crazy, even though you're sober." It wasn't the drugs. And that was 2014. And then a year later, in 2015, I tried to commit suicide, and I was heavily medicated, and I got a lot of judgment for it. So I left. I left 12 step, and I just lived life on my own. And my life. I ruined my life without drugs and alcohol just as easily, because all those years of using, I had no principles. I had no principles. I had street principles. I had violence. I had sexual promiscuity. I had lying, cheating, and stealing. Those were my principles. So when I got sober, those were still my principles. It was still, how can I get you? It wasn't violent. It wasn't violent anymore, but it was still abusive, and it was still forceful, and it was just, so I didn't have principles. So I got really desperate again in sobriety. My mental health. I went to outpatient treatment for my mental health, because of that suicide attempt and like constant suicidality. And then I went back to 12 step, and coupled with therapy, coupled with medication, and actively working 12 step, my life has grown to what it's grown into today. So that's why I maintain, and that's what my maintenance looks like. It's active therapy. I go to therapy. I go to couples therapy with my partner, even when things are good. Even though we're doing well, I still check in with the therapist. Is there anything on your mind? Blah, blah, blah. And I have individual therapy with a black therapist. I've never had a black therapist until I was 29 years old. So I connect with a woman who walks me through life, and I have a sponsor, and I go to meetings. I'm going to a meeting after this. Like I actively, but I need to forever treat my illness, whether it be my mental illness or my my addictive illness. I need to forever treat them, and I've conceded, and I enjoy treating them, because it makes it so I can have these conversations on a microphone with very little shame. There was some shame in this conversation, but I feel more freedom in sharing it than keeping it to myself, and that's because of being an active member of a recovery community. And again,
But
I do it in fellowship. I do as well.
But also, and you said you felt shame. The difference is you walk through it bravely. The difference is you let the feelings happen. Because when you don't go through feelings, they don't go away. They come back, and sometimes stronger. I'm proud of you for just walking through it, because that's where the healing is, walking through that event and saying, what is my decision and my response? That's really what healing is. People make it complex. Like, no, you just make a new decision. But one of my final questions for you is, if you had a chance to go back in the time machine and you saw yourself when you were about to take the plunge into the abyss, what would you say to begin to rescue yourself?
Whew. If I had to, this is gonna be weird. If I had to whisper something in my ear, if I have to whisper something in my ear, it would be that you are okay. You're okay. You're okay. And if I had to like plant a seed in my young mind, is that I'm okay. And you're okay the way you are. You're okay the skin color you are. You're okay talking the way you do. You're okay. You are okay. Instead of, because that's what I know now. That's what I can tell in meditation and with my therapist. Even when I'm fucking up in life, even when I'm fucking up in life, my sponsor will essentially, in more words, say you're okay. And that's what I've learned to do in meditation, is self-soothe and tell myself you're okay. I no longer need sex to soothe me. I still like attention and validation to soothe me. That I don't know if that goes away, but it's nice. I'm sure you like it too. But go ahead.
No, I was saying there's always a healthy amount of everything that we tolerate.
Yeah. Yeah.
Like if I take a selfie and I only get one like on Instagram, I'm bothered, right? but I get over it. Then I just move on. Whereas if you, and I always liken it to, if I see certain posts and then it's repetitive, it's because there's something that they're getting from it. And you're the master of inconspicuous posts. I don't know how you take the pics, but I always look like I'm studying myself.
I have someone who shoots my content.
And it's beautiful because I like that you use color, and I think that, because we didn't touch on this, but your representation, your thoroughness in your post, it is breaking the chain of what we believe masculinity should look, feel, sound, and be received as. You're this this guy who has muscles and who has a brawn. But like I told you, you have a voice that is calm and patient with yourself. It's not that you're trying to be patient with us, but you're patient with yourself. And when you model that for yourself, you exude that to other people. So I want to say that I'm proud of you.
Thank you.
I don't always know what people hear from other people because we do the work, but we don't know. So I'm going to say for what I know of you in such a short time, I'm proud of you, and that God has not even started making a mistake yet. So He didn't start with you.
Yeah.
You are a beautiful human being. Despite your mistakes, you are a beautiful human being. You are loved. You are you are you are a catalyst for many people's next level in life. So I appreciate and love who you are.
Thank you, man. I appreciate that. Those affirmations from men. You know, I did a whole, like, when I was first learning how to podcast, we did a whole episode on the difference between validation and affirmation. And validation is permission, right? It's like, please validate, give me permission to be. But an affirmation like the one you just gave me is acknowledgement. It's the acknowledgement of my existence. And that goes, affirmations from men who you respect, go leaps and bounds, you know.
But I will say but I will say when our parents or our caregivers don't provide the model of validation and affirmation, because there's a healthy mix, as we talked about. What we don't feel in the home, and only if we feel that we've missed it, that we try to replicate that in people that can never give us the mom and dad feelings.
Yeah.
That's where we get into the toxicity and to trying to make our boyfriend our dad or make our girlfriend our mom, and that's not her place. That's not his place.
Yeah.
And I know that you have another meeting to go to. So again, I want to say thank you for being vulnerable.
Yeah.
Feeling safe with me, because I don't take for granted that people share with me because I'm special. They share because they know they're special.
Yeah.
Be clear. I don't think I'm doing anything stupendous. I just feel like I'm just a facilitator of a beautiful life story. Yeah. That's all.
Thanks, man. I appreciate you. As we play out, plug all of your stuff. We'll link your Instagram under your video, so people will be able to find you on Instagram.
So, yeah, I make my life very simple. My Instagram is Cory George. No, I'm sorry. My Instagram is Cory George Cares, and Cory is spelled Cory. People want to add an E or all these things. Cory George Cares, because that's really my life story. I care. My website is corygeorge.com. You can find out about my background, about my services, and really about why I do what I do. We haven't gotten into my life story, and maybe that's another conversation.
We'll do another one.
But like yours, there's value in the pain if we make it so. That's really the only social media I go to, because I make my life simple.
Gotcha.
That's it.
Awesome. Well, thank you so much, Cory. I appreciate you, and it's a pleasure. It's a pleasure to be open with you. Thank you.
You are more than welcome, and you have a wonderful night and a wonderful week.
Awesome. Thanks.